Before her, a yellow envelope lay in stark contrast to the pristine order of her workspace. No stamp, no address, no sender. It was in the envelope that unsettled her. It was what she found inside. The merger agreement or rather, a copy of it, page for page. It mirrored the one she was set to unveil to the press the very weekend. But this version was defiled with red ink 3 jagged lines beneath clause 7.3 and beside them. A warning scrawled in bold, unwavering handwriting. This clause is a trap. If you sign it, Calvert won't belong to you anymore. Her breath caught. Her fingers curled tight around the paper's edges. It was still faintly damp, freshly printed. But how? This document had been locked down, accessible only to a handful of trusted individuals. She slammed her finger against the intercom. Seth, full security review. Now, I want all surveillance footage from this floor after 11 p.m. last night. I want to know exactly who came into this office. Yes, ma'am. Right away. 10 minutes later, the head of security appeared, flanked by 2 compliance officers. A tablet glowed in his hand. Sienna leaned forward as the footage played. There, in the silent grayscale footage, a man in janitor overalls moved quietly through the office. He swept, wiped surfaces, collected trash, and then after a pause before the photo of her father on the shelf, he placed the envelope gently on her desk and left without looking back. Name? She asked, ice in her voice. Evan Marlowe, came the reply. Night shift janitor. Hired in March. Keeps to himself. No prior incidents. Clean record. Bring him in. He entered with quiet dignity, tall, lean, his posture straight despite the weight of years etched into his salt-tan pepper hair. His eyes were neither frightened nor defensive. They were watchful, the eyes of someone who had seen life strip people of everything but their spine, and still stood tall. Sienna didn't bother with pleasantries. Where did you get this document? Who gave it to you? He held her gaze calmly. No, one gave it to me. I didn't need access to know something was wrong. I've seen this kind of play before. It's subtle just enough to tip control, without notice. Her voice sharpened. I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked how'd you got your hands on it. He remained composed. Have you ever checked the second floor print queue? People often forget to pick up their test prints. What they discard sometimes speaks louder than what they keep. She narrowed her eyes, but he went on, his tone steady. I recognize the structure of the clause. It's the kind of hidden mechanism used when someone wants to control a company without public scrutiny. I saw it once before, and I didn't speak up. I lost everything. Where? His voice dropped lower. Whitaker and Cross. I was a senior auditor. In 2017, I warned them about the $370 million misstatement. No one listened. I lost my career, my savings, my marriage, but I kept my integrity. The name landed in her mind like a hammer. She knew it. Everyone on Wall Street did. An anonymous report had surfaced then, so detailed, so unflinching in its precision, it had shaken the industry. No one ever claimed it until now. Do you have proof? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Not the kind you can frame, but enough to know this clause transfers voting rights into a foreign trust. If you sign, you won't be the one steering this ship anymore. Who's behind it? He didn't need to say it. His eyes told her everything. Her voice trembled. Graham. Evan didn't nod. He didn't need to. I'm not accusing anyone, he said gently, but I don't want to see someone like you, sharp, capable, become another cautionary tale. Sienna turned away, her mind spinning. Graham Voss, her coup, her right hand, the one who had sold her this merger like salvation wrapped in gold. She remembered warning him not long ago. I'm not afraid of losing money, I'm afraid of losing control. He'd smiled back. Then let me hold the wheel for a while. She faced Evan again. Go back to work for now. You're not fired, but don't leave the building. Wasn't planning on it. He said quietly, not yet. You've just stepped into a storm. You realize that. He met her gaze. If I stay silent again, I'll have nothing left to teach my daughter. Something in her shifted then. Not trust, Not yet, but the beginning of something more dangerous. Doubt. The lobby buzzed with its usual morning energy. Executives moved with mechanical precision, briefcases swinging, screens glowing, but Evan Marlowe passed through them like a ghost, unseen. To them, he was just the janitor, an invisible part of the machinery, but in his pocket, folded neatly like a relic of war, was a copy of the claws that could have stolen the company. He didn't look at the executives. He'd once been one of them. He knew how easily the floor could vanish beneath their feet. A guard greeted him. Busy day, huh? Aren't they all? Evan replied with a dry smile. Especially when someone's trying to sell the building from under your feet. Upstairs, in a conference room bathed in early light, Sienna sat alone. A video paused on her tablet. The footage showed Evan placing the envelope down. Calm as confession. She hadn't spoken to anyone since viewing it, not Graham, not legal, not even her assistant. She played back a clip from her voice memos from the night before. Her own voice echoed. Clause 7.3 transfers voting power to a Cayman shell. But the board still controls final decisions, right? She hadn't been sure then. Now, her doubt had turned to dread. The door opened. Graham stepped in. Tailored, polished, unruffled. You wanted me, he said smoothly. She didn't look at him right away. Remind me who drafted Clause 7.3. He paused, just a beat. Legal. Probably via the Finance Subcommittee. She stood, her voice cool. Has anything changed in the Silvergate terms? Anything that would alter ownership structure post-merger? He laughed lightly. Lightly, you're still the face of the company, Sienna. This just scales what you built. But she wasn't asking to be placated. She was asking for truth, and she could smell the lie. Later that night, Evan returned to the janitor's closet. He shut the door like a man entering confession and pulled out a tattered notepad. From beneath his supplies, he scribbled, Clause 7.3, split vote Voss. Possible beneficiary confirmed trustee on Cayman Arma. Knock interrupted him. He opened the door cautiously. Maisie, his daughter, backpack half-zipped, holding a cookie in one hand and a wrinkled drawing in the other. Got bored. Miss Darlene said I could find you. He knelt. You should have stayed put, kiddo. This place isn't for wandering. She handed him the drawing. A stick-figure family, him, her, and a woman in a blazer with a serious face but a big smile. Is that her? Maisie asked. The lady from this morning. She looked scared, like when I break something and try to hide it. He blinked. She's the CEO, sweetheart. She doesn't scare easy. Maisie bit into her cookie. Not of people, but maybe of herself. Back in her office, Sienna watched the city glow with 1,000 lights. She sat in the dark. It helped her think. Her mentor's words haunted her now. Power isn't about control. It's about knowing what you're willing to lose. She whispered into the silence. What am I willing to lose? Down in the garage, Evan closed the trunk of his battered sedan, tucked Maisie in with a blanket, and looked back at the gleaming tower. I don't know if she'll listen, he said from the back seat. Maisie's sleepy voice piped up. You weren't trying to be heard. You were just telling the truth, right? He smiled into the rearview mirror. That's the thing about truth, kiddo. It doesn't always shout, but it always echoes. And with that, he started the engine, and so did something else. A reckoning had begun. Don't blink. Evan's hands wouldn't stop trembling. Even after he tucked the folded document inside his jacket, he muttered to himself words only half-formed, weighed down by memory and fear as he slipped away into the shadows of the corporate tower upstairs beneath the smooth, polished ceilings of the executive lounge. Sienna Calvert stepped in for her 9:30 briefing, heels silent on the velvet carpeting, but her stride faltered. There, perched on a velvet chair by the window, like a sparrow curious for its own good, sat a little girl. Her legs swung freely, a purple crayon dancing across the page in her lap. Her mismatched sneakers, one pink, one blue, told a story of independence, of joy unburdened by symmetry or protocol. A nervous receptionist hovered nearby, fidgeting with her tablet. I'm terribly sorry, Miss Calvert, She stammered. It's Mr. Marlowe's daughter. Her skull closed unexpectedly. Some emergency. He didn't want to leave her alone. He promised she'd stay out of the way. Sienna lifted a hand gently. It's all right. Her name's Maisie. The girl looked up, grinning brightly. Hair tied in a ponytail that had surrendered its order hours ago. You're the CEO lady, right? She chirped. Sienna arched a brow, bemused. I suppose I am. Maisie nodded. Matter of fact, you don't look as scary as Daddy said. Sienna nearly choked on a laugh. Is that so? He said you look like someone who doesn't believe in sleep or second chances. The receptionist gasped, but Sienna laughed a full, unfiltered sound that surprised even her. Maisie lit up. Double quote C. You should laugh more. Your face gets prettier when you do. And just like that, like a whisper between heartbeats, something inside Sienna cracked. Not broke, not shattered, just cracked. A small fracture in the wall she'd spent years mortaring shut with control, distance, and ambition. She knelt, resting one hand on the back of Maisie's chair. What are you drawing? A house? Maisie said, but not a real one, a safe one. Sienna's voice softened. Safe from what? Maisie didn't flinch. From people who smile when they're lying. Sienna said nothing. She simply rose, took one final glance at the drawing, and walked away. Back in her office, the fortress of her authority, Sienna unlocked her personal device and dove into the contract archives. Her fingers danced across the keys, but a hesitation lingered in the pit of her stomach. Clause 7.3, the heartbeat of the merger. But the history wasn't in the standard logs. Instead, it had been buried, rooted through a mislabeled archive, disguised as a compliance memo, a tactic invisible to most, but not to someone watching closely. Only someone with elevated clearance could have done this. She called legal. I need metadata logs on all edits made to the draft merger agreement within the past 90 days. Full trace. Quietly, yes. Miss Calvert. May take a few hours. Good. Make it quiet. She hung up. Then, without even realizing, opened her voice notes. Her own voice played back from a recording dated a week prior. If this backfires, it's on me. I can't keep pretending I see everything just because I'm not allowed to blink. She didn't even remember saying that. But the truth of it echoed clear, raw, and impossibly loud. Later that afternoon, Evan passed by the printer room, a place he usually avoided. But today, something caught his eye, a single page, half spilled from the output tray. Curious. He picked it up. Subject line, Transition Protocol, Post-Merger Voting Realignment Author, Graham Voss. His stomach turned. The memo was drenched in corporate ambiguity, but beneath the euphemisms and coordination language, he recognized it for what it was, a quiet coup. A transfer of power masked as oversight. He folded the page and slipped it into his notebook. Then he did something he hadn't dared do in years. He sent in a mail. Subject, the things we pretend not to see. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect trust. But I think you're starting to see it now. They buried it deep, but it's there. Look at the metadata. Look at who accessed the compliance shell. Don't blink. And that night, Sienna read the email. She didn't reply, but she didn't delete it either. She sat in the dark, watching the city flicker around her like 1,000 unsaid truths. One floor below, Evan mopped the marble floors, unaware he'd reignited a fire she thought long extinguished. In a corner of the lobby, Maisie colored quietly. Her newest drawing was simple 3 stick figures, hand in hand. One tall, one medium, one tiny. In bold, uneven letters across the top, she'd written, "Truth is what makes a place safe." And across the towering building, in rooms far apart, but bound by something deeper than proximity, the broken people felt something stir, not certainty, but something close. By sunset, Manhattan glowed like a cathedral of steel and hush. Sienna Calvert stood by her office window, arms folded tight, the city mirrored in her glassy stare. Behind her, her tablet buzzed with board alerts and curated press briefings. She ignored them all. In her hand, a printed email. Subject, don't Blink, it wasn't the words that rattled her. It was the tone, not desperate, not begging, just settled. The kind of truth that stands even when no one believes it. She turned slowly, picked up the phone, get Evan Marlowe to the 42nd floor. 10 minutes later, Evan stepped into her office. The scent of bleach still clung to his sleeves, but he carried himself differently now. Not hidden, not ashamed, just ready. Take a seat, she said softly. He did, without hesitation. I read your email, she began. Then I pulled the metadata logs, just like you said. She slid a file toward him. Graham's name appears 3 times, once when accessing the compliance archive, again when the clause was renamed, and most recently last week with full edit permissions. Evan's eyes flicked to the file, but he didn't touch it. You already knew, she said quietly. I didn't know, he replied, but I've learned to smell rot, even when it's covered in gold leaf. Sienna exhaled, fingers pressed to her temple. I built this company from nothing, she whispered. Every deal, every partnership, all of it, born from fear that if I blinked, someone would take it from me. And now, Evan said gently, the threat isn't coming from outside. It's standing right next to you. She looked up. I need to stop this, but I can't make a move unless I'm on solid ground. The board already thinks I'm paranoid. Then let me help you. Silence stretched between them. You want to trade your mop for a badge and a laptop? He smirked faintly. Let's just say I'd rather clean spreadsheets than coffee spills. She hesitated. I'll authorize a temporary role. Quiet. You'll get access, but if this leaks, we both burn. Evan nodded once. I've already been through hell. This time, I brought a flashlight. She almost smiled. Almost that night. In his modest apartment, Evan sat at the kitchen table. An old laptop glowed before him. Maisie slept in the next room, tiny socks discarded like breadcrumbs along the hallway. His fingers flew across keys, digging, sifting, remembering, reviving a part of himself long buried. His phone buzzed. Message from unknown. They'll come for you next. He stared at it, unfazed, then deleted it. Truth had always been dangerous, but silence was death. The next morning, Sienna entered the boardroom. Graham Voss was already there, sipping black coffee, sleeves rolled with casual arrogance. You look rested, he said smoothly. Looks can lie, she replied, voice steady. Their eyes locked. There was a glint behind his, the glint of a man calculating odds. I'm bringing in a quiet consultant, she said. Sanity check. Pre-signature audit. He didn't blink. Paranoia doesn't suit you. Neither does betrayal. She took her seat. That afternoon, Evan now in slacks and a simple button-down sat before the Calvert digital vault. He tapped the password. Let's see what ghosts still live here, he muttered. And there it was, a single Excel file, hidden, under deferred liabilities, dated 6 months ago. A detailed transfer of equity rights to a Cayman Island shell. Trustee, Graham Voss. That evening, Maisie curled into Evan's lap with a book clutched in her arms. You working for the nice lady now? She asked. Just for a little while. Is she gonna be okay? He hesitated. I don't know. She's smart. But even smart people get trapped when they trust the wrong hands. Maisie laid her head on his chest. Then maybe she needs someone who tells the truth, even when it hurts. Evan held her tighter. She does, he whispered. We all do. And in the city of ambition and quiet betrayals, the people sat one uncovering evidence, the other rediscovering trust. They didn't yet know the storm was near, but they knew this. Truth never stays silent. It knocks. The janitor who didn't blink, that silence between them wasn't just awkward, it was alive. Heavy, personal, rooted in something deeper than business, and for the first time, Evan didn't see a towering CEO defending her empire. He saw a woman who'd spent years patching herself together behind walls built not for power, but for survival. Later that afternoon, the humming heart of Calvert Equities pulsed inside the company cafeteria. Graham Voss stood alone, sipping his espresso from a sculpted ceramic cup, his eyes scanning the crowd. like a chess master analyzing his final gambit. His phone buzzed. No name, no pleasantries. She knows. Graham didn't blink. He merely placed his cup down, adjusted his cufflinks with the precision of a man recalibrating strategy. It was time to pivot. That evening, as the office emptied and the sun sank behind Manhattan's jagged silhouette, Sienna sat hunched over her desk reviewing security archives. From 6 months ago, every motion tied to the compliance archive folder. Login logs, badge swipes, metadata trails, and there it was. Grainy, but damning dark Graham, alone in the finance conference room after hours, plugging in a USB drive and silently rewriting folder permissions. No hesitation, no disguise. He never thought she'd look that far back. He thought I wouldn't notice, she whispered. The intercom clicked. Miss Calvert, her assistant's voice came through. Brittle. Mr. Voss is here. Says it's urgent. Sienna's eyes narrowed. Send him in. Graham strode in as if he owned the building's oxygen. Sienna, he said, his voice smooth as silk soaked in arrogance. Wanted to check in before tomorrow's press round. She gestured toward the chair across from her. Have a seat, Graham. But he didn't. Instead, he positioned himself near the floor-to-ceiling windows, surveying the glittering city like a man observing land he'd already claimed. You've been distant, he said, keeping his back to her, almost like you're preparing for a battle that doesn't exist. Sienna said nothing. He turned, measured. Partnerships are built on trust. She met his gaze, calm, unyielding, and in his eyes for just a heartbeat she saw it. The flicker, the slip, the crack in his mask. What are you accusing me of? He asked, voice cold. Sienna opened a drawer and pulled out a folder copies, not originals. She slid it across the desk. He looked at it, but didn't touch it. You've been busy, he murmured. I know everything, she said, voice steel. The shell company, the trustee, the signatures, the metadata. I even have footage of you inserting the USB. His jaw tensed. You think this wins you something? She stood. It wins me my company. Graham laughed a dry, venom-laced sound. The laugh of a man who knows he's cornered and is ready to set fire to the walls on his way out. You think the board will side with a janitor over me? He's not a janitor, she replied, calm. He's the only man in this building who didn't blink when truth got inconvenient. Graham stepped forward. Don't start a war, Sienna. You won't survive it. She stared him down. I've survived worse, and this time, I'm not fighting alone. He held her gaze, then left without another word. Downstairs, Evan sat beside Maisie on a lobby bench as she drained her juice box. You're quiet, she said, wiping her mouth with her sleeve. Just thinking. Maisie leaned against his side. Did she believe you? Evan offered a soft smile. No, I think if she believed herself. Maisie tilted her head. That's harder, huh? He nodded. Much harder. Above them, lights flickered awake across the skyline as the battles prepared to begin, one in a boardroom, built on power, the other in the hearts of two people who finally stopped running from their own reflections. Because you in truth shows, you who someone really is, you either fight for it, or you let it drown. The next morning dawned not with rain, but with thunder tension rattling through the halls of Calvert Equities like storm winds. Behind walls, Sienna Calvert stood just outside the boardroom, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. 12 board members waited inside, some loyal, some silent, some polishing daggers with smiles. Her hand hovered over the door. In her pocket, a flash drive. In her chest, a furnace. The door opened. Miss Calvert, Chairwoman Renata Doyle, greeted, clipped in neutral. We're ready. Sienna stepped in and sat at the head of the table. Graham was already seated at her right, flipping casually through the agenda, mask in perfect place. Before we begin, Renata said, Mr. Voss has requested to open with a statement. Sienna didn't blink. Graham stood, buttoned his jacket. I'll keep this brief, he began, voice polished. Deadly, for weeks, Miss Calvert has voiced escalating concerns over the merger. While I understand caution, her suspicions have become paranoia. He scanned the room half priest, half executioner. She's acted unilaterally, initiated unauthorized audits, granted sensitive access to a non-employee janitor all while preparing to finalize the most critical deal in our history. He paused. Out of concern for fiduciary duty, I move we initiate a vote of no confidence in Miss Calvert's leadership, pending internal review. Silence, then murmurs, raised brows, doubt. Miss Calvert, Renata said. Your response? Sienna rose not in haste, but like a wave rising at sea. She pulled the flash drive from her pocket and inserted it into the console. The lights dimmed. A file titled Cayman Transfer. Trustee approval appeared. Then another security footage. Timestamp Graham. After hours. USB in hand. This, Sienna began, isn't paranoia. It's vigilance. She turned to the board. Clause 7.3 was not a clerical error. It was planted deliberately. If signed, it would have shifted control of Calvert equities to a foreign trust. Under one name, Graham Voss. Gasps, audible now. Then the audit logs, the emails, every digital breadcrumb, all leading back to him. Graham tried to cut in. Let's not dramatize. Sit down, Renata snapped. He did, slowly, his paws cracking. Sienna stepped forward. I didn't want to believe it. I thought I was just out of touch, that I'd stopped seeing clearly. But then someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose showed me the truth. She faced them fully, and now, I'm showing it to you. The vote wasn't close. 9-3. Graham was suspended immediately. Legal would follow, but the real damage was carved into the air. The betrayal, heavy and lingering long after the room emptied. Sienna stayed behind, seated alone in the dark, the screen black, but her thoughts very much alive. Outside, in the chilled dusk air, Evan stood beside Maisie. Sienna stepped from the building, coat slung over her arm, the storm finally breaking overhead. You were right, she said, stopping beside him. They never saw it coming. Evan nodded. She glanced at Maisie, who was scribbling in her notebook with a red crayon. What are you drawing now? Maisie didn't look up. A shield. For people who get hurt trying to do the right thing. Sienna blinked, then knelt beside her. That's a very important drawing. Maisie nodded solemnly. My dad says people like you forget you're allowed to be scared. Sienna swallowed. Evan placed a hand gently on Maisie's shoulder. And people like me forget what it's like to be seen. They stood there, all three of them, as rain whispered around them. Sienna straightened. Her eyes found Evan's. I want to make your role permanent. Not as a janitor, as a strategic analyst. Quiet, off books, with full access. Evan exhaled. You sure? I'm not exactly subtle. She gave a tired smile. Maybe I'm done hiring people who vanish when things get hard. He nodded. All right then. That night, in the quiet glow of their apartment, Evan tucked Maisie into bed. Her shield drawing lay on the nightstand. Rough lines, red crayon, shaped more like a heart, wrapped in armor. He stared at it for a long time, then turned to his laptop and began building the next firewall, not with code or fear, but with truth. Because now, he wasn't cleaning up someone else's mess. He was protecting something that mattered, and somewhere, from the penthouse to the basement, something had shifted inside Calvert Equities, because the janitor had spoken, and this time, the company listened. Where truth stands, she stood at the window, her voice low but resolute, the kind of tone that holds more than words. It holds history, every win, every loss. It's written into these walls. Evan stepped forward, close enough that the air between them carried shared pain, not just proximity. Then let's remind them what the truth sounds like, she said, turning toward him with an arched brow. And what would that be? His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It settled into the room like the first snowfall, gentle, but undeniable. It sounds like a woman who didn't flinch when power tried to erase her name, and a man who refused to stay quiet just because the world told him to mop the floor and disappear. Sienna didn't respond. Her eyes drifted shut only for a moment, but when she opened them, they burned with the kind of fire that only truth can awaken. The next morning, the skyline was still blinking awake when Sienna Calvert stepped behind a podium adorned with the Calvert Equities seal. No press release, no advance warning, no board approval. Just a sea of microphones, and the woman who no longer feared the weight of silence. I want to address the recent rumors, she began, voice even as stone. Yes, I brought in a consultant. Yes, his background is unconventional. He worked in our janitorial department. A murmur rippled through the room. No, I do not have a personal relationship with him. Then she paused. But here's what I do have. She held up printed files, the original merger documents, offshore transfer filings, proof of forged amendments. I have evidence that my second-in-command attempted to steal this company through backdoor deals, digital sleight of hand, and falsified clauses. And the person who discovered it doesn't wear $1,000 suit. He wears humility, and that should command your respect, not your suspicion. A reporter raised a hand. Why not just handle this internally? Quietly, Sienna looked directly into the camera, because truth handled quietly often dies quietly, and this one, it deserves to live. The halls of Calvert Equities didn't hum that afternoon, they buzzed. Whispers snaked from floor to floor, but this time, the murmurs held something new. Respect. Evan, once invisible in his overalls, was now met with nods, eye contact, acknowledgement. Not everyone understood the details, but they knew the man had spoken truth to power and lived. In the lobby, Maisie ran toward him, her tiny backpack bouncing with every step. She held out a folded piece of paper. What's this? Evan asked, crouching to her level. I made you a certificate, she beamed, for doing the scariest job in the world. He unfolded the paper, drawn in bright blue crayon. Truth Teller of the Year, for being braver than most adults. Evan's breath hitched. He pulled her into his arms. I don't know what I did to deserve you. Maisie grinned. You stop lying to yourself, from her office window above. Sienna watched them, father and daughter, and something inside her shifted, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Not for the company, for herself, because this time she hadn't outmaneuvered the storm. She had faced it. And with the help of a man once unseen by the world, she reminded them all that truth doesn't always wear prestige. Sometimes it holds a mop and a flashlight hand still changes everything. The old iron gate groaned as Sienna stepped onto the overgrown property. Nestled at the edge of Terrytown, ivy strangled the stone walls. Time had tried to bury what had once been a law office. Waiting by the curb was Evan. Eyes split between the weathered cottage and the little girl coloring in his truck. You sure she'll talk to you? He asked. I'm not, Sienna said. But if she doesn't, Graham wins. Before her fist could strike the brass knocker, the door opened. Margot Levens, once general counsel, now a ghost from the past. Tall, silver-haired, and sharp-eyed, Margot looked like a woman who once carved through contracts like warpaths and had chosen exile over compromise. I need 15 minutes, Sienna said. Margot didn't move. Then she stepped aside. Inside, the cottage smelled of old leather and dried lavender. They sat opposite each other in chairs weathered from decades of high-stakes settlements. I thought I left Calvert for good, Margot said, with my spine still intact. Why now? Sienna placed a flash drive on the table like a confession. It's happening again. Only this time, the traitor wears the face of a friend. Margot didn't touch it. Graham forged my signature, buried a clause that would give him control through a shell. And now he's framed the man who exposed him, a janitor, as a scapegoat. Still, Margot said nothing, until Sienna added, softly, he used your retirement clause, the same legal mechanism you designed, to erase the audit trail. A muscle twitched in Margot's cheek. I warned them, she murmured. Told them we were building a castle with mirrors instead of doors. I'm not asking you to return. Just give your word on the record that the audit trail was tampered with using your legal framework. Margot stood, walked to an old filing cabinet, opened a locked drawer. Inside was a folder stamped, sealed. Handwritten notes, internal memos, a termination letter written for her, signed by Graham, dated months before her retirement. He threatened my name, said I'd be disbarred if I didn't disappear. She handed the folder to Sienna. But I've regretted it every day since. You kept all this? Sienna's voice trembled. Margot gave a wry smile. A good liar never throws away the truth. We just wait for the world to want it again. Back at the office, Evan pored over the folder page by page, his fingers slow, reverent. This is everything, he whispered. Original memos, signatures, emails instructing staff to streamline leadership just before Margot's forced exit. This wasn't just fraud, it was premeditated. Sienna stood by the window. Tomorrow was the annual shareholder assembly, broadcast live, packed with investors still worshiping Graham's charisma. Then we give them gold, Evan said. Truth shines brighter when it's been buried. She turned to him. They'll come for me, the press, the board, the markets. I'll be the woman who let a janitor infiltrate the executive suite. Evan looked her in the eye. Let them talk. You didn't let me in. You listened. Sienna's voice cracked. And if we fail? Evan smiled faintly. Then we fail for something that matters. The silence that followed was full, not empty, heavy with respect. Then a knocked out Maisie peeked in. Dad, can we get tacos? My brain's tired from all the grown-up talking. Evan chuckled. 2 minutes. Kiddo. Maisie turned to Sienna. You should come too. Grown-ups need tacos when they're sad. Sienna blinked, then smiled. That might be the smartest thing I've heard all day. That night, in the corner booth of a no-name taco joint, the three of them sat not as CEO and janitor, not as whistleblower and witness, but as people. A masked, human. Maisie took a bite of her taco, chewed thoughtfully, then said, You know, when someone lies, their eyes blink too fast. That's how I knew Mr. Graham was a fake. Evan laughed. Is that right, detective? Sienna leaned in, amused. We should have hired you months ago. Maisie beamed, then grew quiet. You're not scared anymore, she said, looking at Sienna. That caught her off guard. What makes you say that? Maisie shrugged. You stopped holding your arms so tight, and your eyes, they can breathe now. Sienna swallowed the lump in her throat. Out of the mouths of children. As they stepped outside, the night air warm, she turned to Evan. You were right. Truth needs a reckoning. Evan nodded. Quietly. And inside, he knew tomorrow wouldn't be a confrontation. It would be a reclamation. The ballroom at Astoria Tower shimmered with glass and tension. Chandeliers sparkled above the polished marble floor. The annual Calvert Equity Shareholder Assembly was underway. 300 investors, analysts, and media figures, all dressed in curated power. Graham Voss stood behind the podium, the master of ceremonies, smooth, confident. Good morning, he began, the voice of a man certain of his victory. In a market this volatile, we must evolve. Slides flipped behind him, growth projections, synergy charts, jargon paraded his vision. Our governance model has been simplified, no longer hindered by outdated frameworks. This company deserves bold moves. He smiled like the serpent in Eden. But at the back of the room, Evan Marlowe stood still, Sue pressed, eyes sharp. Beside him, Margot Levens returned from exile. Sienna Calvert sat in the third row, her back straight, her gaze locked. 9:6 at M. Showtime. Suddenly, the room dimmed. The LED screen behind Graham flickered. Confusion bloomed like wildfire. A video began to play. Grainy security footage. Graham, after hours, entering Sienna's office with a USB. Then printing the forged clause. Gasps, murmurs, chairs scraping. That footage is unauthorized. Graham barked. Then a voice filled the room, his voice. One signature. That's all I need. Calvert will be mine by the end of the quarter. Panic struck his features. From the aisle, Sienna stood. This footage is real. And the voice, recorded 6 weeks ago. You have no idea what you're doing, Graham hissed. Sienna walked to the podium. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm protecting 40 years of legacy from being devoured by ambition dressed as progress. Security moved in. This is character assassination, Graham shouted. Then Evans stepped forward. Asterisk, we had the forged document analyzed. That signature. It's a copy from an old employment contract digitally altered. He handed the report to the board chair, signed by a forensic analyst. Silence. Then Renata Doyle rose. I moved to suspend Graham Voss from all leadership duties effective immediately. No objections. Graham was escorted out. His empire crumbled. Beneath his polished shoes. Outside, the press swarmed. Flashes lit the sidewalk. Sienna didn't stop. Flanked by Evan and Margot, she walked until the voices faded. The sun warmed her skin. She looked up, eyes calm. It's done, she whispered. After the first time in years, the truth didn't tremble. People who tell the truth. The people who hold the light. No, Margot said, her voice as soft as rain and just as certain. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning. Sienna glanced toward Evan, something unreadable in her expression. Thank you. But he shook his head, eyes steady and grounded. I just pushed open the door that was already cracking. She smiled. A rare and quiet kind that comes not from triumph, but from truth. And you held it open when it started closing again. That's the difference. They paused at a crosswalk, the city's heartbeat pulsing around them. Evan looked up, as if the answer might be written somewhere in the sky. I'm not a hero. Sienna shrugged, her tone gentle. Neither am I. But maybe we're done waiting for perfect heroes to save us. That evening, Evan stepped up the front porch steps, his key in hand, his heart still heavy from the weight of everything said and unsaid. But before he could open the door, a small voice called him to attention. You're late, Maisie said, barefoot on the porch, arms crossed like a very tiny storm. Again. He grinned. Big day. She nodded solemnly. You saved the company. Evan crouched beside her, brushing a bit of dust from her knee. No, sweetheart. I helped someone brave save it herself from behind her back. Maisie produced a handmade sign, the edges wrinkled and colored in bold red crayon. It read, for truth people only. She taped it carefully on their front door. You're one of them now. Evan blinked, then pulled her into his arms and embrace that said more than any speech, any victory, any boardroom ever could. Across the city, in a high-rise office where power once lived behind mirrors and marble, the truth had found a voice. At this time, it stayed. In the days that followed, the Calvert Equities building fell. Different, brighter. Somehow, the security guard smiled more. Receptionists laughed in the open again. Even the echo of footsteps in the vast marble atrium no longer sounded like secrets. It sounded like space, a space being cleared for something honest, something new. Sienna walked slowly through the lobby, coffee in hand, heels softer against the tile than usual. She wore navy blue, not black. Something simple, elegant, human. She paused at the glass wall overlooking the city and exhaled for the first time in years. Behind her, the footsteps came, quiet and familiar. Strange seeing you, without the board breathing down your neck, Evan said, stepping beside her like he belonged there. He didn't demand space. He simply belonged in it. She smiled without turning. They're still breathing, she replied, just not fire. A pause. Then, you heading to the new office? Evan nodded. Margaret's already claimed the good chair. Said I'd get the desk by the leaky window. Sienna chuckled. Fits you. He turned to face her more fully. You know, I never meant for any of this to happen. She looked at him, eyes warm. What do you mean? I didn't come here to fix anyone's legacy. I was trying to keep my daughter's lunch warm. Maybe afford her a new pair of sneakers. That was the size of my ambition. Her gaze softened. But you didn't just uncover the rot. You stayed when the storm came. That's not small, Evan. He shrugged. You stayed too. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was deep, like the people standing at the edge of a cliff, quietly grateful they hadn't fallen. Later that afternoon, Sienna invited Evan and Maisie to her home, a modest brownstone shaded by tall sycamores. Not the fortress of ACEO, just a house with old bricks, creaking floors, and a heart that had once beat warmly before ambition moved in and locked all the doors. Maisie wandered through the backyard garden like it was a secret kingdom. Inside, Evan stood in the kitchen, watching as Sienna poured lemonade with a grace that surprised him. "You ever take a break?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Once, in college, I read half a novel." "Did it have a happy ending?" "No, but it had an honest one." They sat on the back porch, watching Maisie coax a squirrel from a tree using bits of granola. Sienna took a long sip of her drink, then said softly, "My father used to sit out here when he was tired of being a lion." Evan turned toward her. "What was he like?" She stared into the past for a long moment. "Brilliant, demanding, always 5 steps ahead, but he thought rest was weakness. He taught me to keep moving, or get devoured." Evan nodded. "Sounds familiar, except my dad just disappeared when I was 7. Left behind an empty toolbox and a lot of questions." She looked at him for a long beat. "And yet somehow we both survived." "Barely," Evan replied. With a half-dashed smile inside, Maisie found a dusty photo tucked behind an old award. She brought it outside. "Is this your dad?" she asked Sienna. Sienna took the frame and nodded. "Yeah, that's him." Maisie squinted at it. "He looks serious." "He was." She wrinkled her nose. "My dad gets serious too, usually when rent's due, or when I say something smart, and he doesn't know what to say." They laughed open, raw laughter. Then Maisie added, "But I think serious people need hugs more than silly ones." And just like that, she wrapped her arms around Sienna's waist. The CEO froze for just a second, then lowered her hand to the little girl's back. Her eyes shimmered. Evan watched it all from the porch railing, and in that quiet moment, he saw something inside her unspool, not unravel, just soften, like concrete learning how to let rain soak through. That evening, as they prepared to leave, Sienna walked Evan to the porch. The light above flickered once. She made a note to fix it. "I won't take the permanent position," Evan said, turning. She looked surprised. "Why, I came here to mop floors. I stayed to fight for the truth, but I don't want to become part of another machine. I know myself. If I start chasing safety again, I'll forget why I ever spoke up." She looked down, then nodded. "But if I ever needed a voice like yours again, I'll be there," he said. "Not for the title, for the truth." Sienna's voice trembled. "You know what scares me the most." He waited. "That I spent decades building walls, and it took a janitor and his daughter to show me how to open a window." Evan smiled gently. "Then maybe leave it open this time." Back home, Evan tucked Maisie into bed. She held the photo Sienna had given her of Sienna as a child, standing awkwardly beside her father. "She was little once too," Maisie whispered. Evan nodded. "Everyone was." Maisie looked at him seriously. "Do grown-ups forget that sometimes?" He kissed her forehead. "They do, but the best ones remember just in time." She smiled. "I think she's one of the best ones." Evan whispered, "So do I." Outside their window, the city pulsed horns, laughter, a saxophone drifting up from the street below. Evan stood at the window, his hands in his pockets. He had nothing but his name, his daughter, and a few truths learned the hard way. But tonight, it felt like enough. Across town, in a quiet brownstone with a flickering porch light and a newly opened window, Sienna sat at her desk, writing in a notebook she hadn't touched in years. Not a strategy, not a speech, just 3 lines. "Truth doesn't walk in with credentials. It knocks quietly, mop in hand, and it only leaves when we stop listening." She closed the notebook, smiled. It was time to start listening more. A soft spring. Rain had begun to fall, the kind that whispered through trees and made everything seem like it could begin again. Evan zipped Maisie's yellow raincoat and pulled the hood over her curls. "You ready, sunshine?" She nodded, clutching her stuffed turtle. Outside, Sienna waited under the cafe awning, 3 hot chocolates in hand. Her boots weren't made for puddles, but she didn't seem to mind. The 3 of them strolled through Marlowe Park, the same path where Sienna's father once sat in heavy silence, now echoed with laughter and life. Maisie ran ahead, spinning in puddles arms wide like airplane wings. She doesn't walk, Sienna said. She lives out loud, Evan smiled. She reminds me that joy isn't a reward. It's a right. They walked in silence for a while, the kind that holds no tension, only truth. You could have disappeared after all this, Sienna said quietly. I thought about it, Evan replied. What stopped you? He gave a small smile. Maisie asked me if I liked who I'd become. I didn't have an answer. But then she drew a picture of me standing tall, not hiding, and I realized I'd better start trying. Sienna exhaled. I'm sorry, Evan. He looked over. For what? For every time I saw you and didn't really see you. For thinking you were less than because of a job title. You reminded me what power should look like. He nodded toward Maisie. It's never been about us. It's about the world we leave them. They reached a wooden bench beneath a willow tree. Maisie climbed onto it like a queen. This is the court of big feelings, she declared. Evan laughed. And who's the judge? I am, she said seriously. And I say, you both are guilty of being brave. Sienna grinned. What's our sentence? Maisie leaned in. You have to promise never to stop being honest, even when it's hard. They looked at each other. I can live with that, Evan said. So can I? Sienna echoed. Maisie wandered off toward the duck pond, humming. Evan turned to Sienna. You ever wonder what's next? She shrugged. Every day. But for the first time, I'm okay not knowing. I used to think control was safety, she added. Now I think truth is. He noticed something in her. Hence, you writing again. She opened her notebook. I never stopped. I just wrote in the margins. She flipped it open. We build empires of numbers, but forget to measure integrity until someone sweeps the dust. And we remember what floors were made for. Evan smiled. That's good. I think I'll call it margins. I'd read that. They sat in. Stillness, the kind that only people with nothing left to hide can share. A faint rainbow began to stretch across the sky, blurred but beautiful. Maisie ran back, wet and breathless. Look, Evan scooped her up. I think it is. Sienna reached out, brushing Maisie's cheek. You're the bravest person I've met. You know that? Maisie wrinkled her nose. I'm just a kid. Exactly, Sienna said. And you reminded me that being a kid isn't about age. It's about hope. Evan added softly. And hope is how everything begins again. They walked the path. Home one janitor, one CEO, and one little girl in a bright yellow coat. Not toward what was, but toward what could be. And in the hush of a fading afternoon, with truth spoken and trust rebuilt, their story didn't end with fanfare. It ended with something better: peace, and the quiet promise of a new beginning.